I'm Benji Decker, and today I'll be speaking about something called collaborative production. The main idea of the talk will be that as new communication technologies make collaboration easier, it becomes less and less efficient to try and do things on your own. This means companies and other organizations who are compelled ever more toward integrating distributed resources into the services they provide, and toward releasing their own services to open innovation. It also, though, means individuals who are now living in a world where traditional knowledge stocks aren't as valuable as the ability to work with knowledge flows. That is, competence with the tools that help us acquire, manipulate, and share knowledge on demand. So let's start with what I think is a helpful analogy. How many people are familiar with the movie Castaway? It's the one where Tom Hanks gets stranded on the desert island and has to survive entirely on his own for years. When I watched that movie, I remember thinking that what would have driven me crazy wouldn't be the rain or the heat, the constant physical duress, or even the daily dose of raw coconut and crab meat. It would be the isolation, and not simply in an emotional sense, but an informational, a productive one. Any of my friends who've gone out to dinner with me know how antsy I get in the 3 minutes between when someone asks a question I don't know the answer to, and I pull out my cell phone to Google it. Watching the movie, I couldn't stop thinking the agony I would feel being stuck on an island, wanting to know something, even something trivial, and realizing there was simply no way that information could ever be accessed. Ever. Being confronted with the staggering inefficiency of having to reinvent absolutely everything for yourself. And meanwhile, knowing that if I had some thought, some idea, produced some innovation, it would be lost to history forever. It could never be communicated to anyone. No one beside me would ever be able to do anything with it. The problem with traditional industrial modes of production is it's like each organization is stuck on an island. All of them act alone in silos, each recreating effectively every process, and making their innovations inaccessible to anyone beyond their own institutional bounds. I believe that today we're moving toward a new system, a system of collaborative production, one where we pursue our productive promise together, building on each other's progress, rather than simply recreating and reburying it. To understand this idea, I turn to work of the seminal economist Ronald Coase from the first half of the 20th century. In 1937, Coase wrote a paper called The Nature of the Firm, discussing why organizations act the way they do, and in particular, why they choose to supply their particular set of services. Coase pointed out that in the process of producing goods, firms choose to supply some services directly, investing in capital assets, employees, etc., and coordinating them appropriately. Other services they produce indirectly, simply licensing them in the marketplace from external organizations. When firms produce services internally, they have to pay overhead, the cost of people and services designed to manage the firm's activities. The more activity a firm engages in, the greater these costs. Why then, asked Coase, don't firms simply get all their services from external providers via the market? He explained the reason they don't do this is that externally provided services too come with costs. Transaction costs, the costs of finding appropriate partners, for instance, the cost of negotiating contracts with them, the cost of integrating production systems together. Well, in what would become known as Coase's law, he explained that a firm will tend to expand internal operations until the cost of organizing an extra transaction within the firm becomes equal to the cost of carrying out the same transaction on the open market. What's critical in the current context is the idea that the weights of this particular equation have changed dramatically over time. In the days of Henry Ford, for instance, costs of external transactions would generally have been prohibitive. Finding costs would have involved poor Henry trundling around in the snow to different parts of the country, physically inspecting factories. Negotiations would be uncertain and time-consuming, and physical production integration would have been difficult, if not impossible. Today, by contrast, new communication technologies collapse the cost of collaboration. The internet facilitates partner finding, clearinghouses and development platforms preset contracts, and globalization, cloud infrastructures, and the increasing proportional value of intellectual property support easy turnkey integrations. So as a result of all this, it makes sense that reliance on external partners should become a greater and greater part of our production mix. In examining this idea, I realize, though, that the pattern isn't confined merely to organizational production. In fact, it applies equally well to things like learning processes. 50 years ago, if you wanted to know some fact, say George Washington's birthday, you'd have to hike to the local library, thumb through the card catalog, find the relevant book, find the right page, skim through it, and only then would you have finally your desired data. As a result, it made sense to memorize it. It made sense to make that upfront investment to internalize the data inside your mind, because were you not to do so, it would be a major pain to access that fact later on. Today, by contrast, Google means the benefits of memorizing are mitigated, as any time you want, you can easily and instantaneously access any information desired online. So here again, as the transaction cost of procuring resources externally declines, the method by which we perform the process should, like with physical production, reasonably be expected to shift toward external sources. Generalizing, the thesis suggests that fixed investments in production assets, in factories, in permanent employees rather than contracted services, in internalized data, and even making plans with friends in advance rather than coordinating ad hoc via text once out, these are all merely a way to solve the problem of difficult on-demand access. As transaction costs decline, these fixed structures become unnecessary, and even worse, inefficient. They stick you with some particular set of resources, optimal for only some particular set of things, rather than letting you access the best, most tailored solutions the ecosystem has to offer at exactly the moment you need them. In some cases, collaborative production platforms also mean you may be foregoing not only the best alternative the network has to offer, but the sum of alternatives, given you could be aggregating the external contributions of many sources. And as open resources and greater accessibility expand both the pool and potency of potential collaborators, it becomes increasingly unlikely your internal capabilities, bogged down by the responsibilities of upfront investment, can rival the creative diversity of the network as a whole. So this is the first piece of the thesis. Organizations and individuals shouldn't try to do most things on their own. They should harness the power of collaboration by utilizing external resources. But there then emerges an equally important flip side to the argument, which is the idea that for things organizations and individuals do, they should harness the power of collaboration again, this time by releasing these resources to others and letting the network help build value on top of them. You can see this dynamic in every organization that produces products as so-called platforms, rather than merely as finished goods or services. For instance, Google releasing its Android operating system to any device manufacturer or carrier who wants to build products with it, a strategy in stark contrast to Apple, notorious for its closed ecosystems that channel software exclusively to its own products. Perhaps the best example, though, would be Amazon. In Amazon.com, the company offers a complete, vertically integrated product to consumers. It creates and manages its own digital storefront, where you can purchase goods sitting in Amazon's warehouse through Amazon's payment processing system, shipped to you directly through Amazon's built-from-scratch fulfillment infrastructure. But critically, each of these services the company offers in its own production stack, it also releases openly for anyone to come along and build value on top of. So imagine a small retailer, let's call it Gear and Stuff, who specializes in, say, mountain climbing. Gear and Stuff could create a website with interactive maps of all the mountains in the Northeast, listing what shoes you'd want for each. The company could then link through to Amazon's API to let customers buy and receive shoes through Amazon's systems, collecting a revenue share on each sale through Amazon's affiliate fee program. A mom and pop operation, Gear and Stuff couldn't have managed its own warehouses and wouldn't know anything about accepting digital forms of payment. But what they do know is mountain climbing, something Amazon wouldn't have had time or the experience to do anything with. And because Amazon doesn't require any sort of deal or preemptive permission for collaboration, this co-supplier can simply come along, add value, and drive incremental sales that Amazon couldn't on its own. Others might use the Amazon stack differently. Integrated retailers might use the Amazon.com storefront, but handle payment and fulfillment themselves. Or companies outside retail altogether might license serving capacity from Amazon's Web Services program, as in fact many of the internet's biggest names do, allowing Amazon to capture revenue in areas it would never enter, like gaming. Amazon has already made the investments in each of these capabilities for its own product. Why wouldn't they amortize the cost as widely as possible by letting others help return value using them? Here, too, the dynamics extend beyond merely firm behavior. When then candidate Obama focused campaign resources in 2008 not on staff and call centers, but on building call center tools that unmanaged volunteers could utilize, he was tapping into the power of network production. In fact, one could argue that by opening his brand to innovation using remixable symbols like hope, change, and his iconic O, and being more open than any candidate previously to appropriation via the web, he was doing precisely the same. Or to cite the quintessential example, Wikipedia. In the pre-internet world, encyclopedias like Encarta, Britannica, and WorldBook all competed against one another, selling a product that was 95% similar and perhaps 5% differentiated. Wikipedia, though, came along and decided instead of building a final package and attempting to sell it, it would build a platform for information assembly where anyone could come help build value on top of it together. Today, Encarta, WorldBook, and Britannica have all folded, while Wikipedia thrives as the seventh largest website on the internet. And the same applies to individuals. Much has been made of Mark Zuckerberg's constant nudging of users toward more liberal privacy settings on Facebook. But he's right. Sharing is the way of the future. When we release information, we make it available for others to add value on top of. Some of what we share may seem trivial at times, but it's in this sharing that we create the opportunity for this content to hit, to find someone, somewhere in the world, at some point in time that can add value on top of it. And so in the end, you arrive at this radically new landscape. Horizontal supply layers emerge who, instead of trying to do everything on their own, release services openly for others to build value on top of, optimizing resource investments by spreading them across as wide a base as possible. Integrators can then come along and swoop up all these layers, saving the burden and exposure of fixed investments by licensing services on demand, building some value independently, but then combining it with all the resources the network has to offer. We come to a world of meshed production, a complex ecosystem of mass collaboration. There are tons of complexities I'm of course leaving off here. The mechanics of how groups can now work together so effectively, and the benefits they have over centralized processes. The counterpoint benefits of internal activity, and the bounds of quality assurance and interconnectedness. How distributed production opens the door as well to interactive, bidirectional production. The massive displacement this all implies, but also the incredible gains to efficiency and sustainability. And so we come to a world of ubiquitous connectivity, where we collectively pursue humanity's promise, constantly endeavoring onward and upward. Coordination becomes less important, but collaboration paramount as everyone begins working together apart to drive the staggering, unprecedented innovation and value creation of the coming century.